He never expected the truth to come from a folded piece of paper. That's how the story begins. Not with an explosive argument, not with a confrontation, not with cameras or interviews or breaking headlines, but with something far smaller, far quieter, far more devastating than all of that. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. A hidden letter, handwritten, undated, tucked away where he wasn't supposed to find it. Let me ask you something right at the start. What do you do when the person you trusted the most leaves behind something that makes you question every conversation, every fight, every sacrifice you ever made? Do you get angry? Do you break down? Do you ignore it and pretend it means nothing? Or do you stare at the words, realizing they tell a story you were never meant to read? That's the exact moment Prince Harry found himself in. One moment, he was looking for an old photograph. The next, he was holding a letter written in Meghan Markle's handwriting, a letter that didn't sound like a love note, or a diary entry, or a confession. Instead, it sounded like something else entirely. Something rehearsed, something structured, something planned, something that would shake the foundation of their marriage. He opened it slowly, not yet knowing that every word inside would start a chain reaction that he couldn't stop, even if he wanted to. But before we get to what the letter said, before we dig into why Harry's voice cracked when he whispered, I defended every word she said. Now I see it was rehearsed. Let's rewind just a little. Let's step backward into the atmosphere of tension that had already been building long before that envelope saw the light of day. Because trust me, this didn't come out of nowhere. This didn't happen in a vacuum. The warning signs were there, scattered through interviews, arguments, backdoor meetings, royal communications, and public appearances. You've probably seen some of them, even if you didn't realize what they meant at the time. Tiny moments that didn't make sense until you placed this letter at the center of everything. That's when everything starts to snap into place. That's when the dots connect. That's when the story becomes clear. Let's paint the picture. It was late evening. Harry had been pacing for hours, restless in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe you know that feeling, the sense that something is off, something is missing, something is hidden just out of sight. Maybe your instincts whisper before your logic catches up. That was Harry's state of mind. A man searching for something he didn't realize he was searching for. He opened a drawer, then another, then a box, then another box, and then he found it. A small, cream-colored envelope sealed but slightly bent at the corner. No name on it. No date. No label. Just there. As if it had been shoved in a hurry. As if someone was hiding it but didn't have enough time to do it properly. He held it between his fingers. He hesitated. But curiosity, especially when mixed with suspicion, is a powerful thing. He opened it. That's when the first sentence stopped his heart cold. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't even personal. It was strategic. A line that made it clear Meghan had been thinking, planning, and preparing long before certain events happened publicly. And not just preparing emotionally, but preparing narratives. Those narratives later appeared in the Oprah interview, in documentaries, in podcast episodes, in magazine spreads, in friendly press pieces, even in casual stories told to friends. Harry stared at the handwriting, feeling the air thicken around him. He read the first line again, then a third time. And then he sat down, because reading any further while standing felt impossible. Have you ever had a moment where the truth hits you so hard that you physically can't remain on your feet? Harry did. And this was only the beginning, because that first letter was just one of many. As he would soon discover, there were multiple notes, some drafts, some finished, some crossed out and rewritten, each one hinting at something far more complicated and far more deliberate than he ever imagined. But in this introduction, let's focus on the emotional earthquake that started it all. Imagine defending someone against your own family, against your friends, against the entire institution you grew up in. Imagine putting yourself in front of the blast, multiple times, because you believe in them, because you trust their truth, because you feel their pain as if it's your own. Now imagine discovering that some of those emotional confessions, some of those tearful stories, some of those "this is my truth" moments might not have been spontaneous at all. What would that do to you? Would it destroy you? Or would it finally wake you up? Harry sat there, reading line after line that didn't match the woman he thought he knew. Instead, it matched something else, something he never wanted to admit could be real. Planning, structuring, scripting. drafting narratives before the events they described had even fully unfolded. That's when panic set in. Not anger, not rage, not betrayal. Panic. Because once you see one truth that contradicts a story you believed in, your mind doesn't stop. It spirals. It races. It builds its own timeline of doubts. You start asking questions you never thought you'd ask. Was the Oprah interview spontaneous? Were the tears real? Was the story of suffering genuine or rehearsed? Harry didn't want to think that way. He fought against it. He tried to convince himself he misunderstood. But the dates scribbled on the margins said otherwise. Tiny handwriting in the corners. Little arrows connecting ideas. Rehearsed phrasing. Notes like say this emotionally and pause here. You don't annotate a diary that way. You don't emotionally ad-lib with timestamps. You don't discover your feelings by drafting them weeks in advance. Harry swallowed hard. He wasn't prepared for the next lines. He wasn't prepared for the next letter. He wasn't prepared for the idea that these letters weren't meant to ever be seen. Not by him. Not by the public. Not by anyone. But here they were. In his hands. Proof of something he couldn't unsee. Why does this matter now? Because the cracks in the Sussex brand are appearing everywhere. Netflix deals questioned. Hollywood interest cooling. Public sympathy fading. Royal relationships in ruins. And now, with Harry allegedly discovering these letters, everything changes. Everything. This is not just about a marriage. This is not just about a scandal. This is about trust, truth, authenticity, control, narrative power. And what happens when the mask slips? Harry whispered the same sentence over and over again, trying to understand it, trying to rewrite reality in his mind. I defended every word she said. Now I see it was rehearsed. It's painful even to hear, isn't it? Painful because it reveals a level of vulnerability we rarely see in him. Painful because it reminds us that the strongest loyalty can sometimes blind the kindest heart. Painful because you can hear the loss in his voice, the loss of certainty, the loss of belief, the loss of the story he lived inside for years. But let me tell you something even more important. This introduction is only the doorway. Because once Harry realized this wasn't just a single letter, once he understood that this envelope was the tip of something deeper, darker, and far more orchestrated, everything unraveled. You're about to see that unraveling step by step. You're going to see how one letter led to another, and another, and another. You're going to see how each new discovery chipped away at the shield Harry had built around Meghan. You're going to see how confusion turned to suspicion, suspicion turned to realization, and realization turned into what can only be described as a complete meltdown. But we are not there yet. Right now, we are in the moment where it all started. The moment he sat with a letter that felt like a betrayal disguised as neatly written cursive. The moment he realized that stories he believed were raw and unrehearsed might have been crafted long before the world heard them. The moment when loyalty met the truth head-on. And the truth won. What came next would change everything, and no one, not even Harry, saw it coming. The envelope wasn't addressed to anyone. That was the first detail that bothered him. A cream-colored envelope sitting crookedly at the bottom of an old wooden box, almost embarrassed to exist. No name, no date, no clue indicating who was meant to read it, if anyone was meant to read it at all. And that alone should have been a warning. But Harry didn't realize that. Not yet. He was tired. Not physically, though his body felt heavier these days, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually tired. The kind of exhaustion that creeps up on you after years of defending, explaining, justifying, apologizing, and holding everything together until the glue itself begins to crack. He had come into the room looking for something innocent. A photograph. A small, trivial piece of nostalgia to add to a frame Meghan had planned to send to a charity auction. Harry always helped with these small tasks. They grounded him. But this time, something else was waiting. Maybe you've had a moment like that too, when you go searching for one thing and stumble onto something else entirely. Something you were never meant to see. Something that makes you stop breathing for a second. Something that changes the direction of your life. When Harry lifted the lid of the box, he wasn't thinking about betrayal. He wasn't thinking about secrets. He wasn't thinking about hidden letters or erased truths, or the chilling realization that the person he trusted most had been writing things he never knew existed. He was thinking about the photograph. Just the photograph. He shuffled through old notebooks, loose receipts, scraps of paper covered in doodles and reminders, and then his fingers brushed the envelope. It didn't belong with the rest of the clutter. It felt deliberate, careful, intentional, hidden. He picked it up slowly, the way someone picks up a sleeping baby or a fragile ornament, careful not to disturb whatever might be inside. He tilted it one way. Nothing moved. Tilted it the other. Still nothing. And that was when his curiosity, the same curiosity that had once gotten him into trouble as a boy sneaking through Kensington Palace halls, kicked in. What was this? Why was it here? Why was it hidden? He held it up to the light. He squinted. He frowned. And then he saw it, just the faintest outline of handwritten lines inside. Slanted script. Slightly looping. Familiar. Meghan's handwriting. He stopped breathing. You know that feeling, don't you? When your mind suddenly sharpens because something clicks into place, something you didn't expect, but now can't ignore. Harry swallowed hard. It wasn't the existence of the letter that unsettled him. Meghan wrote notes all the time. Thoughts, affirmations, lists, diary entries, plans, ideas. Her handwriting was everywhere in their home, on sticky notes, notebooks, planners, fridge reminders. There was nothing unusual about Meghan writing something down. But this was different. This was hidden, tucked inside a box she hadn't opened in months. Quiet, out of sight, not meant to be found, not meant to be read, not by him. He slid a thumb along the envelope's flap. It opened easily. Too easily. Had it been sealed? Was it meant to look sealed? Or had someone opened it before him? Harry's heart thudded. His fingers trembled, not because he was scared, but because his instincts were finally starting to whisper what his brain wasn't ready to accept. Something is wrong. He reached inside and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, still warm from being held between his hands. He unfolded it slowly, like the pages might burn him. And then he saw the first line. His entire world flipped. He blinked. Read it again. Read it a third time. Each time, the meaning became clearer and more devastating. It wasn't a story. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't an emotional outpouring. It was a plan, a strategy, a narrative outline of how Meghan might present herself publicly if things with the royal family became untenable. That was the word she used, untenable. Cold, clinical, calculated. And then the next lines. And the next. And the next. Each one sharper than the last. She wrote about framing herself as a royal outsider. She wrote about highlighting moments of exclusion. She wrote about amplifying certain emotional beats. And the way she wrote, methodical, structured, made Harry's stomach twist. Because this wasn't a diary. This was preparation. This was rehearsal. This was scripting. Harry didn't realize he had sat down until he felt the edge of the chair press into the backs of his legs. He lowered himself, letter still open in his hands, eyes trembling as they moved across each word. And that's when it hit him. Some of these lines were familiar. Not familiar as in, I've heard her say this before in private. No, familiar as in, she said these exact words in interviews. A phrase here, a metaphor there, a specific emotional arc. Things she had said publicly months later were here, written long before she had ever uttered them aloud to him, to Oprah, or to anyone else. Do you see where this is going? Because Harry saw it. Slowly, painfully, unavoidably. The question he never imagined asking himself rose in his mind like a shadow. Was any of it real? He tried to shake the thought away. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to picture Meghan sitting at a desk writing drafts of emotional revelations. He didn't want to imagine her preparing lines about suffering and mistreatment before the situations even unfolded. He didn't want the letters to be what they undeniably looked like. But denial only works if there's room for doubt. This letter left none. Harry leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers pressed into his temples. He shut his eyes tightly, but the words were still there, burned behind his eyelids. Say this emotionally. Pause here. Highlight outsider perspective. Emphasize isolation. Use personal examples that resonate. He felt sick. He felt betrayed. He felt foolish. He felt like he had fought battles for someone who had practiced her war cry long before the war began. And then, because curiosity is cruel, he reread the first line of the letter again, hoping he had misinterpreted it. He hadn't. The line was clear as day, written in Meghan's unmistakable script. If they don't accept me fully, I will present the truth as I experience it. The truth as I experience it. Not the truth. Not what happened. Not my feelings. A crafted experience. A curated narrative. A version of events shaped in advance. Harry whispered to himself, voice barely audible. This can't be real. But it was. And deep down, he knew it. Here's the thing about discovering a painful truth. Your mind fights back. It tries to bargain, to explain, to soften, to reinterpret. And Harry tried all of that. Maybe she was just venting. Maybe it was nothing serious. Maybe she wrote it during a rough moment. Maybe she didn't mean it literally. Maybe he was taking it out of context. But then he noticed something that ripped those excuses apart. A date. Not a complete date. Just a small handwritten note in the corner that looked like a planning timeline. A week number. A month abbreviation. A scribble. But enough. Enough for Harry to realize the letter was written before the events it described. Not during. Not after. Before. Before the tears. Before the fights. Before the interviews. Before the truth bombs. Before everything. His chest tightened. He stood up, pacing, the letter still in his hand. He ran the other hand through his hair. He muttered half-formed sentences. He tried to make sense of it. But how do you make sense of something that destroys everything you thought you understood? He read the letter again. And again. Each time, more details leapt off the page. Tiny stars drawn next to certain words. Emphasis. Underlined marks beneath. Outsider perception. Circled reminders. Practice tone. Arrows connecting emotional beats. This wasn't spontaneous truth-telling. This was narrative engineering. Harry sank into the chair again. His throat tightened. He didn't cry. Not yet. He just felt the world tilt. Then something else caught his attention. A faint indentation on the paper. Not ink. Pressure marks. From writing on the sheet above it. Which meant this letter wasn't alone. There were others. Dozens, maybe. Entire drafts. Entire scripts. He froze. Because suddenly, the photograph he'd been searching for felt like a lifetime away. Suddenly, the entire room felt different. Charged, icy, suffocating. Suddenly, he wasn't a husband searching for a keepsake. He was a man standing at the edge of something dark and dangerous, holding the first clue in his trembling hands. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. There were more letters, more drafts, more secrets, and one of them, one in particular, would devastate him in a way nothing else ever had. But before he found that letter, he needed to breathe. He needed to understand. He needed to convince himself that maybe, he had misread the situation. Except he hadn't. Because when he looked back inside the box, he saw the corner of another envelope. And this one had writing on the outside. A title, a subject line, a phrase that would hit harder than anything in the first. He reached for it slowly, heart pounding, breath quickening. He had no idea that this next letter would expose something far more explosive. Meghan's early drafts of the royal outsider narrative. The very narrative she later shared with Oprah. And it was written long before Oprah ever picked up the phone. But what came next would change everything. And no one, not even Harry, saw it coming. The title on the second envelope was what froze him. A single phrase. 4 words. Neat. Centered. Underlined twice. As if it were the heading of a university essay or a pitch deck for a documentary. Royal outsider narrative. Harry stared at it, his pulse thudding in his ears. The wording didn't sound emotional. It didn't sound like someone pouring out their feelings in a moment of raw vulnerability. No, it sounded deliberate, professional, strategic, like something written for an audience, like something written to persuade. He held the envelope by its edges, as though touching it too firmly might change what was inside. Part of him wanted to tear it open immediately. The other part wanted to shove it back inside the box, close the lid, lock it, and pretend he had never seen any of it. But curiosity destroys distance. And Harry had already crossed the threshold. He opened it. The paper inside wasn't folded carelessly. It was crisp, neatly creased, and oddly formal. Almost like she had prepared it for a meeting or a rehearsal. At the top of the page, in Meghan's distinctive, looping handwriting, were 3 words that hit him even harder than the envelope title. Key talking points. Harry's stomach twisted. Talking points? Talking points for what? For who? For when? He lowered himself into the chair, paper trembling between his fingers, and began to read. As he scanned the first paragraph, the blood drained from his face. He wasn't reading reflections. He wasn't reading a diary. He wasn't even reading a rant. He was reading a draft, a curated emotional framework of how Meghan might describe her experiences in the royal family if things escalate unnecessarily, as she wrote. Escalate unnecessarily. What did that even mean? Who decides what counts as unnecessary? And why was she preparing this long before anything had escalated? Harry exhaled shakily and kept reading. Meghan had broken the narrative into sections. Emotional isolation moments. Institutional coldness. Cultural outsider angle. Family friction. Personal vulnerability arc. Public empathy triggers. Triggers. The word jumped off the page like a slap. Did she really write that? Public empathy triggers? He blinked hard. This was not emotional expression. This was strategy. She had listed examples, scenarios, suggested phrasing, and even emotional beats. Moments where she could pause for effect. Moments where she could emphasize sincerity by lowering her voice. Moments where she could introduce a tear-filled anecdote. He whispered under his breath, "Dear God." He kept reading, each line heavier than the last. There were bullet points. Actual bullet points. Moments to highlight. First realization of outsider status. Staff tone shift. Public misinterpretations. Feeling unheard. Emotional suppression. Personal identity conflict. Maternal fears in unfamiliar environment. Things she would later describe, almost word for word, in televised interviews. Harry's hand trembled. He felt nauseous. He remembered those interviews so clearly. The way her voice broke. The way he squeezed her hand. The way he leaned toward her protectively, believing every word came straight from the deepest place in her heart. And now he was staring at evidence suggesting rehearsals. You don't practice emotional breakdowns. You don't draft sorrow. You don't outline pain like a speech. Unless. No, he didn't want to finish the thought. He wasn't ready. He forced his eyes to continue down the page. Meghan had written a note in the margin. Make sure this feels authentic. Feels. Not as. Authentic as a feeling, not as a truth. Harry felt a sharp, hot pressure rising in his chest. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room, letter still clutched in his hand. Why would she write this? What was she planning? What version of events was she preparing for? And the biggest question, why didn't she tell him? Because if this was innocent, why hide it? If it was harmless, why keep it buried in a box? If it was personal venting, why outline it like a press brief? A realization hit him. One he didn't want to acknowledge. This letter wasn't meant for him. It wasn't meant for any private moment. It was meant for public consumption. For an interview. A documentary. A conversation with a powerful media figure. Someone like. Harry froze. Someone like Oprah. His mind replayed the interview. The one watched by millions around the world. He remembered Meghan's tone, her phrasing, her hand gestures, the emotional arc of her story. And then he saw the notes again. Emotional isolation. Identity conflict. Feeling silenced. Fear for her son. It matched. Line after line, point after point, moment after moment. Harry couldn't breathe. The room blurred. The air thickened. The floor felt uneven beneath his feet. He set the letter down before he dropped it, then pressed both hands to his face. The humiliation hit him first, hard and sharp. He had stood next to her, defending her, swearing that everything she shared was raw and real. He fought the palace. He fought the public. He fought his own blood. And now he was staring at evidence that some of those brutally painful moments weren't spontaneous truth-telling. They were practiced, designed, chosen. He whispered to the empty room. How could she do this to me? How could she do this to us? It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was disbelief. The kind that splits your world in half. He sank back into the chair and read the next section. Subheading. Potential narrative expansions, if necessary. If necessary. What did that mean? Necessary for what? For survival? For storytelling? For branding? He didn't know. He didn't want to know. But the words kept unfolding. Meghan had written small lines beneath that subheading. Alternatives. Backup angles. Different emotional perspectives she could pivot to if one wasn't received well. Motherhood angle. Mental health angle. Identity angle. Isolation angle. Harry's eyes widened at a phrase circled twice. Avoid sounding rehearsed. The irony punched him so hard, he almost choked. Avoid sounding rehearsed. Written in a rehearsed script. He let the paper fall onto the table, staring at it as if it were alive, breathing, mocking him. How long had this been going on? Was this the only letter? How many drafts existed? How many conversations did she practice without him knowing? As he stared at the paper, something colder hit him. She didn't write this as an immediate emotional release. She wrote this before anything publicly happened. She wrote this in anticipation, in preparation. For what? Harry didn't want to accept it, but the truth pressed in anyway. She wrote this for the world, not for herself, not for her family, not for him. Then he noticed it, something he had overlooked in the first read-through. A date range. 2 tiny numbers scribbled in the corner of the page. Weeks before their Oprah interview request was even sent. He felt his heart drop. This wasn't a reaction. This was premeditation. He grabbed the letter again, scanning for details he might have missed. In the corner of one paragraph, she had written, "Emotion must match message. Emotion must match message. Not the other way around. Not message must match emotion. Emotion crafted for message. Emotion chosen for impact." Harry stumbled backward a step, gripping the back of the chair for balance. He whispered, voice shaking, "No, no, she couldn't." But the paper didn't lie. It had her handwriting, her rhythm, her phrasing, her ink smudges, her corrections, and the most damning part, her intentionality. You ever have a moment where you realize the person you trusted most might not be who you believed they were? Where the story you've been living suddenly feels rewritten? That was Harry's moment. He forced himself to read the rest. There were entire paragraphs about positioning. How she felt she needed to frame the narrative so that public sympathy aligned with her lived experience. She listed what she believed people cared about, what would resonate, what would humanize her. One line stood out: "Control the frame, or others will." Harry clenched his jaw. He understood the fear of being misunderstood. He lived through the press storms, the headlines, the paparazzi brutality. He knew the pressure that came with being a royal figure. But what shook him was the idea that the emotional stories he defended so fiercely might have been partially curated. He turned the page over. There were more notes on the back, more drafts, more bullet points, more phrases he recognized from interviews. And then he saw a line scribbled and circled: "Rehearse this with Harry when timing is right." The world fell out beneath him. Rehearse with him when timing was right. Harry felt an ache deep in his chest. The kind of ache that comes not from physical pain, but from emotional collapse. She wasn't planning to confide in him. She was planning to practice with him. He dropped the letter onto the table, stepping back like it might burn him. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was clarity. Terrifying clarity. He looked toward the box with dread. Because if this was the first letter, what were the others like? How many more narratives were drafted? How much of their life together was rehearsed behind the scenes? He took a step toward the box. Then another. Slow. Hesitant. Shaking. He reached in. His fingers brushed another envelope. But this one felt different. Heavier, thicker, filled with multiple pages. And written across the front, in bold handwriting, were the words: "Royal treatment incidents, detailed." Harry's breath froze. He pulled the envelope out slowly, knowing, without doubt, that opening this one would reveal something far more devastating. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. He remembered the night vividly. Not every detail, not every word, not every glance, but enough to feel the weight of it pressing down on him again, like a storm that had never really passed. It was a confrontation he had thought he'd won, or at least survived. A heated argument in a royal residence, voices raised, hearts racing, secrets spilling. He had defended her, every word, every accusation, every tear she had shed publicly. Every interview, every claim, every private conversation he had insisted was authentic. Now, staring at the letters, he wondered if he had been defending a carefully crafted script instead of a genuine truth. Have you ever stood up for someone only to realize later you might have been standing for a lie? That's the realization crushing him now. That was the realization that would rewrite years of memory in a single heartbeat. The evening had started quietly enough. A routine family dinner that had escalated into a heated discussion about media coverage, loyalty, and perception. The royal family had been cautious, their words measured, their eyes calculating. But Harry had been unrelenting. He had spoken with the conviction of someone defending justice, someone defending love, someone defending a truth he believed in without question. "Do you understand what she's been through?" he had asked, voice rising. "Do you understand how she's been treated? I can't stand here and watch you all dismiss it." The room had grown silent. Eyes flicked to him, some skeptical, some frustrated, some silently exasperated. And yet, he had held his ground. He had felt righteous. He had believed. But now, with the letters spread out before him, with the strategic annotations, the carefully plotted bullet points, the premeditated narrative, he wondered, had he been played? Had every argument, every defense, every act of loyalty been exploited as part of a larger story he wasn't meant to see until it went public? The words he had spoken to his family echoed back at him. Every time he mentioned betrayal, every time he implored them to recognize injustice, he realized he had been defending a rehearsed tale. A tale written in advance, practiced, refined, ready for maximum emotional impact. He could still feel the heat in the room that night. The tension coiled like a living thing. Charles, calm but firm, had leaned forward, voice measured but piercing. "Harry, you're letting your emotions dictate what you see. Don't mistake sentiment for reality." Harry remembered bristling at that remark, angry at the suggestion that he could not discern truth from deception. And yet now, he could see the irony. How had he missed it? How had he not seen the layers, the planning, the preparation, hidden behind what appeared to be raw emotion? He thought of Meghan, sitting quietly beside him that evening, her hand on his arm, eyes shining with trust. Every glance, every subtle nod, every whispered assurance had seemed genuine. He had believed. Of course he had. How could he not? But the letters told another story. They suggested forethought. They suggested strategy. They suggested that the emotions he thought were spontaneous, heartfelt, and authentic might have been orchestrated, drafted, revised, practiced. He felt a pang in his chest. Not hatred, not rage. Something heavier, something more suffocating. A deep, crushing disappointment. Not in her, necessarily, but in himself. For seeing what he wanted to see. For trusting too readily. For defending too fervently. For believing without question. Harry's mind raced through the events of that evening. The sharp exchanges with Charles and William, the subtle jabs from cousins and advisors, the quiet disapproval masked behind polite conversation. Every word he had uttered to defend Meghan now seemed filtered through a lens of manipulation he hadn't recognized at the time. He remembered a particularly tense moment. William, voice low but piercing, had said, "Harry, you can't protect everyone. Sometimes you have to see the bigger picture." At the time, Harry had snapped back, insistence in every word. "I see the picture just fine. I know the truth, and I'm standing for it." Now he wondered, what had the truth been? Whose truth? Had he been defending her truth, or someone else's script? He paced the room, letters in hand, replaying each argument, each word, each tear. The house was silent. The only sound was the rhythm of his own breathing, ragged and uneven. The weight of realization pressed against his chest like a vice. Each heartbeat seemed louder than the last, echoing with questions he could not answer. Had she planned this all along? Had she anticipated his reactions? His defenses? His loyalty? Had every moment, every emotional revelation, been part of a carefully calibrated narrative, meant to elicit maximum sympathy from him and the public? He stopped pacing and sat back down. His hands trembled as he held the letters again, scanning them for details he might have missed. Margins scribbled with notes, bullet points, arrows connecting ideas, emotional cues, timing instructions, references to future interviews, references to public perception, references to him, Harry, positioned as the supportive, steadfast partner, unaware of the orchestration. A bitter irony twisted in his stomach. He had seen himself as the protector, the shield. The one who defended her against family, against media, against the world. And yet, he realized he might have been an unwitting participant in a narrative designed to portray him in a very specific light. A loyal husband, yes, but also a man manipulated into validating a story carefully constructed for maximum impact. He leaned back in the chair, head in his hands. The room blurred. Emotions collided. Disbelief, sorrow, anger, confusion. Could he have missed every subtle sign? Was he really this naive? Or had he simply wanted to believe too desperately? He thought of the Oprah interview again. Every phrase, every emotional beat, every pause. Could it really have been rehearsed? Practiced? Drafted in advance? The notion made his stomach churn. The public had believed it was spontaneous, raw, heartfelt, and he had defended it vigorously. without reservation. The letters now suggested otherwise. He gritted his teeth, trying to steady his breathing, trying to silence the questions pounding in his mind, trying to make sense of the impossible. Had he been defending fiction masquerading as fact? Had he been manipulated without realizing it? The weight of betrayal pressed down, not like a sharp knife, but like a suffocating fog. It didn't just hurt. It disoriented him, left him questioning the reality he had taken for granted. And then he noticed it, a subtle annotation in the corner of one page, a reference to him. Not mentioning him directly, not criticizing, not complimenting, simply noting that his reactions could be relied upon, that he would defend, that he would support, that he would believe, that he would react exactly as she expected. His hands went cold. The realization was staggering. Someone had counted on him, counted on his loyalty, counted on his instinct to protect, counted on his emotional investment to amplify a story carefully curated for public consumption. And they had succeeded. He could still hear the echoes of his own words from that night. The impassioned defense, the unwavering support, the raw emotion. Every syllable now felt like it had been written for him to deliver. And perhaps it had. Harry sat there, heart racing, mind spinning. He had always prided himself on seeing through deception, on trusting instincts, on knowing when someone was sincere. Yet here he was, staring at evidence suggesting that everything he had defended, everything he had believed, everything he had championed, might have been meticulously orchestrated. He took a deep breath, trying to ground himself, trying to separate what he wanted to believe from what the letters suggested, trying to remind himself that reality wasn't always as simple as it seemed. And yet the proof was undeniable. Meticulously drafted notes, carefully planned emotional beats, references to him, his reactions, his loyalty, narrative arcs that would later appear in public statements and interviews. The letters were not only a revelation, they were a roadmap of manipulation, a roadmap that traced every step of his devotion, every moment of his defense, every tear he had shed on her behalf. He closed his eyes, letting the silence of the room envelop him, letting the magnitude of the discovery sink in. The quiet was deafening. The realization was suffocating. The truth, as he now saw it, was inescapable. And then, as if daring him to uncover more, his eyes flicked toward the next envelope in the box. A heavier one, labeled faintly in the corner with words that made his stomach drop. Oprah rehearsal drafts. Harry froze. The thought struck him like lightning. The interviews, the public confessions, the stories the world had believed were raw, heartfelt truths. What if they had been rehearsed all along? What if the trust he had placed in every word, every tear, every revelation, had been manipulated from the start? His chest tightened. His breath caught. His mind raced. Because if this next envelope was what he feared, nothing would ever be the same. And he had to know. He had to see it. But what came next would push him to a breaking point he had never experienced, and it would change the course of his life forever. That he froze. Not because of what he had already read. Not because of the meticulous notes, the bullets, the strategic phrasing, or even the rehearsed emotional beats. No, he froze because of the dates. Little scribbles in the margins. Tiny numbers that, at first glance, seemed insignificant. But when he connected them to the events Meghan had later described publicly, the pieces didn't just fail to align, they outright contradicted each other. Harry's chest tightened. She had written about events before they had even happened. Before. That was a word he couldn't get out of his head. Written in a corner, a note barely visible unless you squinted. Yet the implications were crystal clear. She had anticipated moments, rehearsed lines, planned emotional arcs, before the world, before him, before the family, before anyone. He read the first date again. Weeks before the interview request for Oprah had even been sent. Weeks before the raw revelations that had gripped the world. Weeks before Harry had stood by her, ready to defend her against the palace, against the press, against anyone who dared question her story. He felt bile rise in his throat. He had been defending something that may not have been entirely real. Something curated. Something premeditated. And now the puzzle pieces he had trusted, believed in, lived by, they suddenly felt like lies arranged with care. He slammed the letter onto the table. This wasn't simply planning. This was preparation with purpose. Purpose designed to sway perception, to engineer public sympathy, to sculpt a narrative before the events themselves even occurred. Harry's mind raced. Was he overreacting? Could the notes have been a writing exercise? A rehearsal of emotional clarity for therapy, for reflection, for understanding? He wanted to believe it. God, he wanted to believe it. But the timeline problem wouldn't let him. The dates, the cross-references, the consistency of phrasing, it all screamed premeditation. He could hear the echoes of public interviews, phrases he had defended so fiercely, words delivered with heartbreak, with sincerity, with authenticity. Or so he had thought. Had they been rehearsed? Had he been a participant in a carefully constructed emotional performance without realizing it? Harry's fingers shook as he traced the dates in the margins. He read each line aloud quietly, almost to himself. The voice shook. She's writing about the staff's coldness before it even happened. She's describing the isolation she'd feel before anyone isolated her. She's predicting how I'd react before I even reacted. It wasn't just manipulation. It was anticipation. He sank into the chair, holding his head in his hands. The family moments he had fought for, defending her against ridicule, defending her against disbelief, defending her even when logic suggested caution, all suddenly seemed filtered through this new lens. Was she shaping reality before it arrived? Had every tear, every confession, every heartfelt word he had heard been carefully prepped in ink, penciled out for effect, timed perfectly for maximum impact? He tried to argue with himself. No, that couldn't be true. Not entirely. There had been genuine moments. Surely there had been genuine moments. Emotional authenticity cannot be faked entirely. Not every reaction, not every heartbreak, not every panic, not every moment of despair could be rehearsed. Could it? Yet the letters suggested otherwise. And there it was again, a small scrawl at the bottom of the page, circled twice. Practice timing and pauses for emotional impact. Harry swallowed hard. It was one thing to write notes for clarity. It was another to write instructions for performance. And then he noticed a detail he hadn't before. Another date, even earlier than the first. This one predated a public confrontation with the palace that had made headlines. A moment he remembered vividly. The one where he had defended Meghan in front of family members, raising his voice, his loyalty on display, every word uttered as though carved into stone. The letter predated it. That meant it wasn't just preparation for an interview. It wasn't just an emotional outline. It wasn't just a draft of feelings. It was predictive. It was pre-planned manipulation. Harry's hands trembled. He could feel the familiar adrenaline spike, the one that comes when your brain is trying to catch up with reality faster than your heart can process it. Everything he had believed about spontaneity, the idea that Meghan's revelations, her emotional honesty, her raw vulnerability, might now be called into question. Not entirely. He knew there had been genuine moments. He knew her humanity, but the timeline problem gnawed at him. How many moments had been spontaneous, and how many had been pre-constructed for maximum narrative effect? His eyes drifted to the box again. There were more letters, drafts, notes, scribbles, arrows, margins filled with thoughts. The timeline was the key. Each new piece would either confirm his suspicions or shatter them further. He remembered sitting through family arguments, defending her. Every protest, every shout, every insistence that her words were true, her experiences authentic. All of it now replayed in his mind under this new light. The disbelief was overwhelming. How could he have missed it? How could he have trusted so fully? How could he have not noticed the signs, subtle, faint, but now painfully obvious in retrospect? His jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, trying to regain composure. He wasn't just facing a letter. He wasn't just facing the dates, the predictive narrative, the pre-planned phrasing. He was facing himself, his instincts, his loyalty, his unwavering defense, his belief in the truth of someone he loved. All of it had been weaponized against him, intentionally or not. And then, through the fog of disbelief and hurt, he realized something else. If she had been drafting narratives before events even occurred, she must have been planning the interviews, the public revelations, the media engagements, the Oprah interview itself. Every emotional spike, every pause, every word carefully considered, written, revised, rehearsed. And if that was true, it meant he had been defending the performance, not just the person. He sank deeper into the chair, staring at the ceiling. The timeline problem wasn't just a small inconsistency. It was a fundamental betrayal of trust. It wasn't the content of the letters that broke him. It was the order in which they had been written, the sequence that suggested foresight, orchestration, and a calculated shaping of reality. Harry felt his chest tighten, his breath caught. He had to remind himself to stay grounded, to think clearly, to separate emotion from fact. But the facts stared him down. The letters were dated. The timelines didn't lie. The narrative had been mapped out in advance. He whispered under his breath, almost inaudibly, "Everything I defended might have been rehearsed." And that realization, the crushing weight of it, left him stunned. He glanced back at the remaining envelopes. One of them, thicker than the rest, caught his eye. The words written on the corner made him pause. Oprah interview drafts. His stomach churned. The first letter had shaken him. The timeline had doubled the impact. But what was in the Oprah drafts? He wasn't ready to see. Yet he had no choice. Curiosity and the need for truth drove him forward. And so he reached for it. Because what came next would push him past disbelief and into a complete meltdown that no one would see coming. That he hesitated. The envelope was heavier than the others. More substantial. The weight of it seemed symbolic. A tangible burden. Harry felt it in his hands as if it were physically pressing down on his chest. He had already read the first letters. He had already traced the timeline and realized the planning was far earlier than he had imagined. But this was different. This was the one that hit hardest. Oprah. The name alone made him pause. He could feel his pulse spike. His palms went clammy. The thought of her involvement, of a media giant so intimately linked to public perception, made his stomach twist. And here, in his hands, was the letter, the Oprah prep letter. He unfolded it slowly, as if speed might destroy him. He braced himself, and the first line made his heart stop. If timing is right, narrative must be controlled. Harry's breath caught. Narrative. Controlled. Timing. Every word calculated. Every word precise. Every word aimed at an outcome he had believed was spontaneous, raw, genuine. He swallowed hard. This wasn't a reflection. This wasn't a diary entry. This wasn't an emotional release. This was strategy. Harry's eyes moved down the page, scanning bullet points, subheadings, and margin notes. It was meticulous, methodical. Every moment of emotional revelation mapped out with almost surgical precision. Emotional beats, pause points, tone of voice, gestures, public empathy triggers. Harry felt his knees weaken. He sank into the chair, holding the letter like it could anchor him. And then he saw it. References to him. Not direct mentions. Not criticism. Not flattery. But observations. Notes on his likely reactions. Suggestions on how to influence them. How to guide him through emotional moments. How to ensure his loyalty would reinforce the narrative. Harry's stomach churned. He had defended her fiercely. He had argued with the palace. He had called friends, advisors, even strangers, explaining her side, championing her truth. Every word had come from his conviction, from his heart, from his unshakable belief in her. And yet, here it was, in black and white. A roadmap showing how he could be guided, influenced, and relied upon to deliver the story exactly as planned. He ran his hand through his hair. This couldn't be real. It had to be misinterpreted. Surely she hadn't intended this in the manipulative way he was reading it. Surely the words didn't mean she had pre-planned the emotional arc of the Oprah interview. Surely. But the dates were there. Margins scribbled with timelines. Crossed out phrases. Revised sentences. Notes about phrasing, tone, timing. And then a chilling line at the bottom, circled twice. Harry must be briefed before delivery for authenticity. He felt bile rise. Briefed. Not surprised. Not informed. Briefed. He had been unknowingly rehearsing someone else's story. Every instinct, every defense, every emotional reaction, measured, timed, predicted, used. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He tried to steady his breathing, to clear his mind, to separate disbelief from reality. But the letters weren't just evidence of premeditation. They were evidence of intention. Meghan had anticipated every key moment, every emotional spike, every sympathetic glance, every tear she wanted him to witness. And she had drafted it in advance. Harry's thoughts flashed back to the family confrontations, to the arguments with his father, with William, with cousins, with staff. Every passionate defense he had delivered Had it been part of a carefully orchestrated performance? Had he been unknowingly participating in a narrative she had designed to sway public perception? The weight of the thought was staggering. He read another section of the letter, detailing potential responses to anticipated questions. Every question Harry had defended publicly was mapped, every emotional reaction predicted, every pause prescribed. Notes like, pause after mentioning mental health challenges. Emphasize isolation at staff events. Look to Harry for reinforcement. Emphasize outsider perception. Maintain sympathetic posture. He felt like the floor had dropped out beneath him. He remembered holding her hand during interviews, squeezing it tightly, nodding supportively, whispering encouragement. Every gesture he had thought was spontaneous, possibly rehearsed, possibly expected, possibly manipulated. Harry's head dropped into his hands. He felt tears sting his eyes, not just from betrayal, but from exhaustion, from shock, from the collapse of everything he had believed in. He had trusted, he had defended, he had loved, and yet, these letters suggested that he had been operating under someone else's script, and the chilling realization struck him. If the Oprah letter was accurate, she had been preparing the performance far in advance. The tears, the pauses, the phrasing, the emotional crescendo, all mapped and rehearsed for maximum impact. Harry thought about every public interaction, every media appearance, every speech he had supported her in. Had they all been influenced by her drafts? How much had been real, and how much had been carefully orchestrated for public perception? He felt a tightness in his chest. His mind raced through every memory, every event, every moment of loyalty. And with each recollection, the letters seemed to mock him. They weren't just letters, they were revelations. And as he stared at the words again, he noticed the final section. Anticipated risks and contingencies. Contingencies. Alternative phrasing. Backup plans if public response faltered. Notes on adjusting emotional delivery. All carefully documented. All meticulously drafted. Harry's heart pounded. It wasn't just planning. It wasn't just rehearsal. It was a blueprint. A guide. A map to orchestrate public perception while manipulating him, the loyal partner, to reinforce it without realizing. He whispered aloud, voice barely audible. How could I have missed this? He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could feel the collapse of certainty, the fracture of trust, the disorientation that comes when you realize someone you loved has anticipated, guided, and shaped your every reaction in the service of their story. He glanced at the box again. There were still more letters, more drafts, more annotations. He knew that opening the next envelope could change everything further, push him to the brink, challenge him in ways he was unprepared for. And yet he had to know. He reached forward, fingers trembling, heart racing. Because what came next would reveal the letters that could shatter him completely and expose not just rehearsed emotions, but a carefully crafted plan that might redefine everything the world thought they knew about Meghan Markle, about him, and about the story they had lived together. The room felt smaller now. Letters scattered across the table, each envelope a revelation. Harry sat back in the chair, exhaling shakily, eyes scanning the sheets of paper before him. His mind raced, trying to piece together the implications. It wasn't just the Oprah prep letter anymore. This next batch, labeled Media Strategy Blueprints, was something else entirely. This wasn't about emotional expression. This wasn't about venting. This was about control. Control of narrative. Control of perception. Control of him. Harry hesitated before opening the first sheet. He knew he would regret it. He knew the words might cut deeper than anything before. But he had to see. He had to understand. Curiosity, that cruel companion, wouldn't allow him to turn away. The first page detailed media channels, specific outlets, phrasing to use in interviews, timing of releases, and carefully curated responses to anticipated questions. Notes in the margins suggested where emotional emphasis should be placed, how pauses would affect perception, which anecdotes would resonate most with audiences, and even the sequence in which personal stories should be shared. Harry's stomach turned. It read like a PR playbook, meticulously constructed and detailed. Every step of a public revelation mapped out. Every reaction accounted for. Every emotional spike engineered for maximum sympathy and attention. He whispered under his breath. She didn't just plan the letters, she planned the world's response. And then the next line hit him harder. Leverage Harry's loyalty to reinforce credibility. His heart sank. He had thought he was acting as a partner, defending her truth. But the letters implied that his loyalty had been anticipated, expected, counted upon. He closed his eyes, picturing the interviews, the documentaries, the magazine spreads. Every emotional beat, every tear, every pause he had interpreted as genuine. What if it had been guided, orchestrated, prepared in advance? The next page detailed messaging for social media, Instagram posts, public statements, media-friendly quotes, suggested ways to present vulnerability, strength, and personal struggles simultaneously. Notes on optics, timing, and impact were underlined multiple times. Harry felt dizzy. This wasn't storytelling, it was performance art. Manipulation disguised as authenticity. A carefully choreographed plan designed to sway opinion and frame the narrative in the most sympathetic light possible. He thought of the public defending her, the applause from supporters, the shock from critics. He had been on the front lines, advocating for her, amplifying the narrative she had constructed long before anyone had seen it. And now he wondered, was any of it truly spontaneous? Could authenticity be manufactured? He read the notes aloud quietly, trembling. Highlight institutional coldness. Emphasize emotional isolation. Use personal anecdotes to humanize struggles. Position spouse, Harry, as loyal ally reinforcing narrative. Anticipate counterarguments and prepare responses. Schedule media interactions strategically for maximum exposure. Every phrase stabbed at him. The anticipation, the forethought, the precision, it was overwhelming. It wasn't just letters anymore. It was evidence that a performance had been planned in meticulous detail, and he had been an unwitting participant. Harry pressed his hands to his face, breathing heavily. The betrayal wasn't personal, it was structural, systematic, calculated, and it cut him deeper than any personal affront could have. He remembered his own words from past interviews, his own defense of Meghan to family, media, and friends. Every statement he had made, every expression of loyalty, every protective instinct, it had been predicted, calculated, anticipated. The room seemed to close in. The air thickened. He felt trapped, not by walls, but by the letters themselves. He turned to the next page. This one outlined responses to potential criticisms. If accused of inauthenticity, it read, use vulnerability, reference past suffering, emphasize outsider perspective. The words were underlined twice. Harry's pulse quickened. They weren't just plans for her. They were plans for him, too, for the way he would react, support, and amplify her story without realizing it. He remembered standing in the palace, defending her to family members, insisting that every word she said was truthful. Every tear she shedded seemed spontaneous. Every confession heartfelt. And now, he questioned it all. He read further. Instructions on public appearances, press conferences, and photo ops. Specific gestures, pauses, glances, even wardrobe suggestions were noted for optimal perception. Notes suggested timing emotional revelations to coincide with media coverage, ensuring maximum attention and sympathy. Harry's head spun. This wasn't just preparation. This was strategy, precision, performance, manipulation. He asked himself a question he didn't want to answer. Had he been defending a performance all along? The answer lingered in the margins of the letter. He glanced again at the section detailing him. Harry, the loyal spouse. Every emotional reaction he had displayed, every public defense he had made, every argument he had engaged in, had been anticipated, expected, relied upon. And now he realized the depth of orchestration. His chest tightened. He thought about loyalty, about trust, about love, about years of defending, protecting, and believing. And now the revelation gnawed at him. What if all of that had been used strategically? What if his actions had been part of a plan he hadn't even known existed? He pressed the letter to his chest, struggling to steady his breathing. And then he noticed the final page. Notes for contingencies. Alternative approaches. Backup phrasing if public perception faltered. Adjustments for emotional responses. Adjustments for him. Harry, the spouse. The partner. The loyal defender. The cold realization hit him like a tidal wave. He had been counted on, manipulated, predicted, and the blueprint was laid bare in front of him, meticulously documented, in her handwriting, with dates and margins and arrows that left no room for doubt. Harry felt sick. He wondered how long it had been in preparation. Weeks? Months? Longer? Every interview, every public appearance, every tear and confession he had defended now seemed part of a larger narrative he hadn't known he was participating in. He sank back in the chair, overwhelmed. And yet, curiosity, painful, relentless curiosity, drove him forward. He reached for the next envelope. Thicker, heavier, labeled in faint, precise handwriting. The letter about Harry. His stomach twisted. Because what came next wasn't just about strategy, optics, or timing. It was personal. It was about him.